I'm gonna show you something beautiful. Everyone screaming for mercy. You want to protect the world, but you don't want it to change. You're all puppets, tangled in strings.
I don't know about you all, but that still gives me chills. I assume it's just because James Spader's voice is that awesome. Hello, everyone. Thank you for listening in. This is the Rattleitchin Broadcasting Network Summer Blockbuster Review Series of the smash hit of the year. I'm calling it right now. Avengers 2, Age of Ultron, came smashing across the world over the last couple of weeks and has done, I imagine we're well over the $500 million mark as far as finances go. It's kicking ass and taking names from a financial standpoint, and that means, we're all here to review it. Now, normally for these, it's me and it's the Supreme Overlord here over at the Rattleitchin Broadcasting Network, Mark Rattleitch. However, Mark, unable to be with us here tonight. He's spending time with his daughter. I'm not going to get too much into that whole thing. That's his personal business, not mine to say. If you're aware of some of the more details, you know. If not, it's enough to say he's with his daughter. Won't be able to be here tonight. Continue to wish Mark all the best, and hopefully he'll be back in the next couple of weeks. He's hoping to be back tomorrow for the Long Road to Ruins look at the Iron Man trilogy. If not, I'll be co-hosting over there along with Sean Comer, so you might be seeing more of me in the near future. But I'm not alone here. We have some great people here on the Rattleitchin Broadcasting Network. A couple of them stepped up, volunteered to help out here, so it's not just me rambling for 60 minutes, because heaven knows nobody wants to hear that. Let me go ahead and introduce these gentlemen first. Coming to us from the state of New York, city of New York, for the title card artist for The Long Road to Ruin, all-around great guy, supremely talented artist, Benjamin J. Colon is with us here. Ben, how the heck are you?
Good evening, Robert. Are you receiving me well here?
Yeah, I got you. Your Skype thing looks to be holding steady.
Nice.
Ben has a long, sad history with Skype and Skype's rocky relationship with Blog Talk, so we have to double-check that every time. All right, also up here from the cheap seat, I keep saying 411 Mania because that's where I write most of the time, but the Rattleitchin Broadcasting Network's Resident Evil Ginger, because every group has to have one. Jason Teasley is here from the cheap seats. How you doing, Jason?
Good evening, fellas. I'm doing all right. How you guys doing?
Not too bad. Not too bad. All right, let's go ahead and jump right into this one. This has been a rather divisive film. I know there's a lot of people who have some complaints about it. Just before we get into specific details, and I'll throw out a plot synopsis briefly, and here's just real briefly, I have to say this to everyone out there. The movie's been out for about a week. It's longer depending on where you live in the world. There's going to be spoilers. You're all forewarned. Things will be discussed here that could constitute spoiling it if you haven't already seen it. You've all been warned. Fair warning. All right, Ben, let's go ahead and start with you. Just real quick, overall impressions of the film by and large. Like it, not like it. You know, how it fits within, relative to the first Avengers movie. Things of that nature.
I enjoyed it a lot. I can see a couple of there's some legit things to sort of criticize about it. I think something that may be coming up that we may be talking about often is just the fact that this is a really ambitious movie. It's set square in the middle of this huge, Marvel Cinematic Universe that keeps growing, and they tried to do a lot with this movie. They tried to close the door on a bunch of different plot threads from the previous Marvel movies while starting a whole bunch of new ones, and in some ways it succeeded, and in other ways not really so much. Overall, though, it was a lot of fun, and I had a really good time.
Yeah, you said it best. This is an ambitious movie, and middle movies and trilogies, and let's face it, the Avengers films are set up as a trilogy with the first one, then Age of Ultron, and I don't care that Infinity Wars is in two parts, it's one story. Middle sections of trilogies have a lot to do, and done right, it's very good. Done wrong, not so much. Jason, same question, your overall just kind of impressions of the movie. Enjoy it, not enjoy it, have fun, or wanted to throw stuff at the screen the whole time you were sitting in the theater?
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think actually this was a better movie than the first one because you had a lot more story depth and not just flashing lights, everybody's together. It's kind of divulged into more of a storytelling rather than just make everything go boom.
Yeah, that seems to be one of the big things that people are either liking or it's kind of putting them off, and there's positives and negatives to both sides of it. I'll go ahead and give a real brief plot synopsis here, and again, we'll get into details that might constitute spoilers in a bit, but we open with the Avengers they're together, they're attacking a Hydra base that houses Loki's scepter, which fell into their hands after the events of Captain America the Winter Soldier, and Baron von Strucker has been experimenting with it. It's the Avengers, they held off an entire alien army, they're going to take down a Hydra base whenever they darn well please, they crush through it. We're introduced through the course of this to the Maximoff twins, Pietro and Wanda, better known in certain circles as Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch. Wanda messes with Tony Stark's mind a little bit, so he takes the scepter and decides they're going to try and finalize his Ultron protocol, which is a artificial intelligence global peacekeeping initiative. During a celebration party for finally unraveling the last bits of Hydra that were still around, they succeed. Ultron is created and immediately becomes malicious. He takes out Jarvis, spreads himself around the world, steals the scepter back, and sets out to wipe out humanity. The Avengers naturally oppose this. We meet Andy Serkis, who is just awesome by and large. Ultron, one of his schemes is he wants to create a partially vibranium body for himself to become more of an android instead of a robot. He is just a cobbled together robot at first, and he evolves his form as the movie goes on. There's things to overcome. The Scarlet Witch gets to mess with everyone's mind to various degrees. Some people it's not a big deal for. Captain America, I think, deals with it rather well, although it touches on a theme with him throughout this movie. The Hulk tears up part of Cape Town before being stopped by the Hulkbuster armor and, Tony Stark. Eventually, the Maximoff twins realize that Ultron doesn't just want to kill the Avengers, he wants to wipe out all of humanity, so they, by definition, them being human, they have to ally against him. Ultron creates a body, it's stolen, and they upload Jarvis into it. That becomes the Vision, and Paul Bettany deserves all the credit in the world for somehow managing to steal scenes from both James Spader's voice and Chris Hemsworth, both of whom are patented scene stealers wherever they go. They eventually they beat Ultron. Ultron is apparently destroyed. Thor goes back to Asgard to kind of set up the forthcoming Infinity Wars. The Hulk leaves the Avengers. Hawkeye retires. Iron Man, Tony Stark bows out. We get a glimpse of the new team, which is headed still by Steve Rogers as Captain America, with Black Widow as the only holdover. It now also features Scarlet Witch, War Machine, the Falcon, and the Vision, which is a solid enough lineup, all things considered. And we get, it's designed to kind of set up further conflicts within the universe while tidying up some of the previous ones, as, again, most middle chapters are supposed to do that. And there's good and bad here. My biggest gripe, I think, and one of them, and I'll throw this one to you two guys and let you, either agree with me or disagree with me and whatnot, but I wanted more of Ultron. And I think part of the problem here relates to the movie trying to tell its own story. And that's not a bad thing for it to do that, but when you compare aspects of this with the first Avengers, we already knew Loki. We knew what he was about. We knew what he was trying to accomplish. I mean, the Chitauri were just, window dressings. They were additions. The meat of that conflict was the Avengers and Loki. And we had already met him in the Thor movie. We'd already met, all the principal characters to varying degrees throughout the other movies, and we were familiar with them. Here we have to introduce a brand new character from scratch with Ultron. And there's no arc with Ultron. There's no development. And I feel it's a weakness in this movie that Ultron is again trying to wipe out humanity and comes very close, but he never feels like a really big deal. And I feel that with trying to introduce a character from scratch while trying to balance the need for all of the other characters, all of the other lines and story. His development and his character kind of got left by the wayside, and I think that's one of the weaker elements of the movie as a whole. Jason, am I way off base here, or what's your perspective?
Oh, I completely agree. I think, honestly, they should have just give you kind of the premise for Ultron and Iron Man 3. That way, just kind of let it be let the story and the background develop a little bit more. Tony basically trying to create basically a sentient being to take over for the Avengers, so everybody can go live happily ever after. So with you saying that, yeah, I agree that I feel they kind of rushed the whole Ultron and Vision storyline both. I think it felt a little rushed, though what they did do, it was amazing what they did with both characters, but I still think it was a little rushed. And they could have fleshed out Ultron a little bit better and just started the story in Iron Man 3 and just continued it and let it come to life at the beginning of the Avengers.
Ben, your thoughts on Ultron? Again, was he adequately fleshed out as a character to your satisfaction?
I tend to wonder. I understand where you're coming from with that. I guess the way I approach it is by way of making an attempt to rationalize why. And you figure, and it was kind of unprecedented the way that the first Avengers movie set up the story that they told, in that the only, if you had never seen any of the other previous movies, which why wouldn't you have, but for the sake of argument, if you hadn't, you wouldn't really know much of anything about Loki, and you'd be kind of lost. And that was something that, this movie probably could have used some build-up. The first movie took advantage of all the Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff and all the fact that it's built on previous movies to be able to do a lot of the character development for the main villain in Avengers before the movie even begins. What we got here was, in the midst of advancing every single other Avengers story that we've already been set up for, and introducing 3 new Avengers, we also had to introduce the villain and give him a motivation for being a villain, and show him coming close to succeeding, and showing him enact whatever plans he had to thwart the heroes, to advance his own agenda, and then ultimately to be defeated. They had 2 hours and 20 minutes to do that. I'm a little bit more forgiving of the lack of development that Ultron got, just because he was one of a ton of different characters that were competing for character development in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I understand why it happened. I mean, and to be fair, a lot of other people would have turned Ultron into a very flat, almost a caricature instead of a full-on character, and I need to give credit to, again, Joss Whedon for succeeding as much as he did, because it sounds like I'm complaining a lot about this, and I'm elements of this border on nitpicking, but I have, there's things that I feel need to be discussed about that could have been improved on, and there's plenty of good things here as well.
I'd like to say too, real quick, I'd like to say too, I've seen some people are not too fond of the way Ultron ended up being portrayed in the movie, as kind of almost childlike in some ways, or kind of all over the place attention-wise, and alternately being that way and then giving grand villain speeches. But I kind of came to the realization that you kind of needed that. You kind of needed that characterization, because if you didn't have the sort of weird, quirky, growing pains type of character that Whedon wrote for Ultron, you basically have Robot Loki. You would have the exact same villain as you did in the first movie.
Yeah, that's fair. That didn't bother me as much when, personally speaking, you have to remember that, again, we actually witnessed the literal birth of this character, and a lot of what he does and says and how he acts reminds me of, I'm bordering on like a petulant teenager at times. And as grating as that is, because petulant teenagers are the bane of humanity's existence by and large, it makes perfect sense for the character, because he has nothing but raw information. The totality of human information is at his disposal every second of every day. But he has no emotional maturity, he has no depth, he has no experience to adequately process it all. So it makes sense for him to be that way. I mean, Jason, kind of final words on Ultron as a character. Anything from him that you really liked? Yeah, because I have things that I enjoy about it as well, and I want to kind of move on a positive note because there's a lot to like about him as a villain, and I'm curious, what did you like about him?
The performance James Spader gave Ultron, the fact that even he was able to, and I'm going to give this to the special effects thing too. Ultron actually was able to emit emotions with, a robot emitting, showing emotion was like crazy in itself. And we kind of talked about this when me and Jesse was on Screaming Boy, but the fact that the performance James Spader gave, the creepiness that he gave Ultron, and just his voice alone was amazing. So the performance that they gave Ultron was great. And I like the fact that he was basically an infant learning, because he had the ideal of humans are flawed, let's get rid of them. And you've seen that progression of him just wanting to get rid of the Avengers, and mainly Tony Stark, to wiping out all of humanity just because of all humanity is flawed.
Yeah, I can't say enough good things about what James Spader was able to do. My issues with Ultron are solely with the writing and the direction. And I have one gripe with Ultron that didn't bother me as much the first time I saw this movie, but the second time it kind of started to grate on me just a tad, and that's the fact that he has lips. And I don't know, I noticed it the first time I saw it, and it feels a little odd. And then the second time, it just kind of stood out a little bit more. And I know Gavin Napier of the Casual Heroes hated that Ultron had lips, and I can understand that. That could be something that just kind of gets on your nerves. But, I mean, James Spader's voice, and I freely admit I am a huge James Spader fan and have been from the final season of The Practice when he walked in and just started stealing scenes from everyone in that particular show, and that's no easy feat. Ben, you and I talked a little bit about this offline. I want to touch on it briefly here. Scarlett Johansson, who plays Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow, was actually pregnant for much of the filming of this movie, and you speculated that maybe her character wound up being rewritten a little bit to accommodate her pregnancy. And do you think that maybe her whole relationship with Bruce Banner kind of spawned out of that more so than kind of a natural narrative?
I can't, of course, I can't say for sure, but
I mean, we're just speculating here.
Yeah, sure. It seems like it was probably expanded to sort of compensate for her maybe not being able to get as physical as she was in the first movie. In the first movie, she was kicking ass all over the place, and they went a different way with this. Luckily, Scarlett Johansson's a good enough actress that she was able to roll with it perfectly well and make it interesting. And that's another thing that I did appreciate about this movie is that, and Joss Whedon in general, that subplot was in this movie, and it gave the movie a couple of breathers. Because otherwise, if not, you would have been very close to 2 hours and 20 minutes of just super people punching robots, which sounds awesome, but after a while, you're going to need a reason to care.
Yeah, this movie, there's a couple of action sequences in this movie that actually feel a little flat to me. The entire chase through, I assume it's Seoul in South Korea on the back of the semi-truck, it doesn't feel, I mean, it just feels flat, just kind of tacked on like we need another action sequence at this point in the movie. I mean, we've seen, moviegoers in general have seen sequences of chase involving semi-trucks that I think were much better than this. It almost feels like there's no scale to it. I mean, there's a scene where, the Widow picks up the shield from Captain America that Ultron had thrown off the ship, and she actually slides under the trailer of the semi and then throws the shield up to him. And it's a very cool visual, but it should be a cool visual, I should say. There's no scenery to it. There's no scale. The action sequences, a lot of them in this movie in general, I feel were inferior from a technical standpoint to the first one. And granted, some of them are extraordinary. I mean, the final sequence with them defending the drill from Ultron is fabulously well shot. It's beautifully rendered. But there's a few that just kind of feel, and I mean, that one's one of them. That one's kind of hard to read. That's kind of the biggest one. I mean, the opening action sequence is very good. There's just a few of them like that just kind of fall by the wayside technically, and it's a real shame. Jason, am I off base here? When it comes to just analyzing the action sequences?
No, I think you're right on the money. I also felt that they tacked the whole tractor trailer scene on just to give Cap and Black Widow just more screen time. At least that's the way it felt to me, because you not only had that, and then you had where the spawns of Ultron will take it up into the atmosphere, and Hawkeye catches it. I mean, it just seems like it was just added in just to get more screen time for the stars. And like you said, it fell flat. At least to me. I mean, Benjamin, you may see it differently, but
Well, I guess maybe I'm a little bit more forgiving of that, just because that's kind of, that's kind of what I come to expect from these type of movies, especially Avengers and Avengers as a brand. I'm expecting the over the top action. Some some of the scenes are certainly better than others. I don't think any particular one of them was. I wouldn't call it flat, but maybe the bar gets set. First of all, the bar gets set pretty high because you've got the huge scene in the first 5 minutes where and that's just my kind of mind blowing stuff. And I wasn't expecting that either. That the movie immediately begins with complete craziness. I would say just that you got to say maybe they were saving it for for the end. Maybe you didn't want anything too early in the movie to overshadow what was coming. Once again, that's a whole lot of speculation, and maybe I'm reaching a little bit, but that's that's one way that could probably rationalize, and I seem to be doing a lot of rationalizing tonight, actually.
No, it's fine. I like having different perspectives when I do stuff like this. If everyone agrees the whole time, it's boring. And thankfully, again, Mark and I go at it from time to time. In fact, we have another plug, but when we reviewed Transformers: Age of Extinction, we had a long discussion about the editing process and how much I felt could have been cut out of that particularly bloated catastrophe. But go back and find that one for all those of you who are interested. I want to touch briefly on a couple of the characters individually here. We finally get some stuff with Hawkeye in this movie, and that actually almost makes me want to segue into talking about the Hulk, because we got the Shoryuken in the background there. But Jeremy Renner as Hawkeye got a little bit of the short end of the stick when it came to the first Avengers. Still very awesome. I mean, and I'm a big fan of Jeremy Renner as well. I thought he was great. I mean, especially in the first thing I really remember seeing him in was the big screen adaptation of SWAT, and I thought he was great as the villain in that movie. But we finally get a little bit of some character exposition for Hawkeye, and not a lot of backstory, but just more depth to the character, and it's welcome. It's very, very helpful. It feels nice to get to know some of these guys a little bit, especially when everyone else gets zapped by the Scarlet Witch, and we get to see some of their darkest fears realized, and that entails some backstory for especially the Widow, because her past is quite horrible. And we just get to see him. He's got a family that he's kept deeply off the books. He's just a good all-around guy. And Ben, I know that again you and I talked a little bit about this, but I want to give you the opportunity here to talk a little bit about some of the scenes with Hawkeye and his family, because I know you were very impressed in particular with his wife and how she was written.
Yeah, I've sort of come to the conclusion, my own conclusion, that Joss Whedon actually took the opportunity to make Hawkeye the audience proxy. He is the least, he could be considered the least superpowered of all of these different larger-than-life characters. He's had the least exposure in all of the previous movies, and he's kind of experiencing all this stuff, and he's portrayed as not quite in over his head, but realizing that he's just kind of along for the ride and doing what he can with what he has. And they humanize him even more, midway through the movie, which, by the way, I'm not the only one who caught this, but I've caught a few people calling this, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles scene where they go to the farm. So I'm glad I wasn't the only one that thought that my mind went to that first. But anyway, they humanize him a little bit more because now all of a sudden he's got a wife and he's got a kid and he's got another kid on the way and all of this stuff that nobody else knew about. And I had mentioned before, the way Hawkeye's wife was portrayed, it was pretty refreshing. As far as portrayal, and Joss Whedon's is generally very good with female characters, and it would have been very easy to write his wife as this sort of bitchy, disapproving, just nagging, stereotype. And she wasn't. First of all, I also mentioned I'm happy to see Linda Cardellini just about anything, so that was nice. But she played the part really well, and she was supportive and sort of lent some weight to that and humanized them even more, and basically said that they need you. You may not think they need you, but they need you. I thought that was really important. That was a really important character beat for Hawkeye, and that was a really important beat for the story itself.
Jason, I want to get your thoughts on this one, because the other character who everybody gets moments in this, but there's a couple in particular. I don't think Thor has much of a character arc for this, and I'm a big fan of both Chris Hemsworth and his version of Thor. Again, he genuinely steals every scene he's in by and large. But he's not, again, there's not a whole lot of development here. He's more setting up the events of what's going to be Thor, Ragnarok, and then the Infinity War storyline. But there's an undercurrent with Captain America that's touched on here, Steve Rogers, that he is displaced. Now, that's true in all the others, but it really is kind of brought up here. His vision that is meant to kind of mess with his head is Haley Atwell as Peggy Carter telling him it's time to go home. And the notion that he is without place continues to be brought up here. I mean, he's literally without a home, actually, after the events of Winter Soldier when his house was destroyed. He jokes with Andrew Mackie's character of Falcon in one of the opening scenes that he can't even afford a house in his own neighborhood of Brooklyn, something that I'm sure made Pat Mullen, something that I'm sure made, everyone who's lived in Brooklyn feel very bad about the current status of that particular borough. And he's even when they first get to the farm, he's reminded a little bit more of what's not there, what maybe could have been had he not had things turned out a little bit differently. And it's very understated, and it's actually a little bit underplayed because, again, there's not a whole lot of room in an Avengers movie for individual characters to really develop and breathe a whole lot. But it is touched on, and I wanted to get your thoughts on that, that's what we're still dealing with Captain America, Steve Rogers. He still feels displaced and homeless in a lot of ways, like he doesn't really belong.
Okay, well, first I want to touch on, Hawkeye real quick. I think
go ahead.
It showed that Hawkeye is actually the glue that holds the Avengers together. He's the one that keeps them grounded because going back to the speech he gives Scarlet Witch, which is epic, he's like, none of this makes sense. I'm shooting I'm shooting aliens and robots with arrows, and none of this makes sense. But I'm going to go out there. I mean, it's a great speech, and it shows the fact that, he is the glue that holds them together because you've got all these superpowered people. You've got a demigod. You've got, a Hulk and everything. But yeah, then you have Hawkeye, who is more concerned about putting the floor in his day room than battling robots. And it's, like I said, it's kind of the glue that holds everybody together. But going back to Steve Rogers, what you brought up, it shows you're starting to see the cracks. And I love it because it's like when when Robert Downey Jr., Tony Stark, says, I don't trust anyone that doesn't have a dark side. And he says, well, you haven't seen it yet. Which, that tension, of course, is going to set up the new Captain America movie. Everybody knows it's going to be Civil War. And it just shows that, because Captain really has no place in the world, he's going to slide down that slippery slope into anger because of the uncomfortable situation he's put in, how he doesn't really belong in basically our time period, and how things were so much simpler when he was actually in his own time period than they are now with, everybody knowing move, which also is going to kind of transition into Civil War.
Ultron gets a great line about Steve Rogers when they meet off the coast of South Africa and whatnot. He's, "Oh, Captain America, God's righteous man," as though you can keep telling yourself you can live without a war, because he is defined very much by the conflicts he's a part of. And I actually have to give credit to Chris Evans as well for being able to express that on screen, because it's a difficult thing to kind of, portray that. And Chris Evans is actually a very talented actor. If you haven't seen Snowpiercer, for anyone out there, look it up. He's got a great kind of monologue towards the end of that is really well done. Again, he's a very talented actor in his own right. Let me see. I need to say something positive about this movie. I need to, because we mentioned a bunch of things, and I need to bring some positivity here as well. I need to mention before, because I've got a major gripe, then I'm going to apologize in advance. It's going to turn into just a bit of a rant, but we'll get to that in a minute or two. But the other major thing I need to praise here is Paul Bettany, who I mentioned just, a little bit ago, but I can't express how great he is with just his eyes. I mean, the scene where the Vision is born and he brings himself to a stop right before crashing through the window of the Avengers Tower, and just the way he looks out at the world and then his own reflection in the glass, it's one of the most beautiful things in this entire movie. Just the subtleties and the small things that he does as the Vision. And I've been a Paul Bettany fan since I watched him in A Knight's Tale. For anyone else out there who's seen that, he plays Geoffrey Chaucer. I got out of my way to find stuff featuring him because I liked so much what he did in that movie. And here he's been the voice of Jarvis from the beginning, and he finally gets to actually, be on screen for a bit. And from the moment he steps out, he is awesome as the Vision. He adequately portrays the character. I mean, the last confrontation between him and Ultron is just wonderful. It doesn't last very long, and it's more dialogue than anything, but it's interesting. And the kind of the clash and the dynamics between them, I wanted more of that actually, more than anything. But I was such a big fan of what he was able to do on screen, and he also gets the coolest moment in this entire movie, I think. By far. When he's able to lift Mjolnir and hands it to Thor, and he doesn't know it means anything. He just picks it up and hands it to him and says, "We have to go." And everyone else is sitting there in shock because they've reminded everyone earlier that nobody but Thor, basically, you have to be worthy to lift the hammer. None of them can do it. Cap can wiggle it a little bit. And here he is. He actually gets to whack Ultron with it a little bit later in the final battle sequence, too, which is also very awesome. But I can't say enough good things about Paul Bettany's turn as Vision. Ben and then Jason, I'll go ahead and limit your thoughts specifically on this version of the Vision. I know I'll mention Gavin again. Didn't like that he had eyes, because the original character in the comics does not have eyes. While I agreed with him about Ultron's lips, I think going with the eyes in Vision, that might stray a bit towards the nitpicky side. I can understand people it might bother. It doesn't bother me. I just said what he's able to do with his eyes alone justifies that change for me. But again, Ben, thoughts on the Vision? Again, brand new character being introduced.
Yeah, and I would take a guess that he might have had the least amount of screen time, but Paul Bettany absolutely made the most of the time that he had, and he was probably one of the top things that everybody was talking about coming out of this movie. I think at least that's what it seemed like to me. I was on Thor Some Material on Monday with Jesse Starcher, cheap plug, but I didn't want to say at that point like what my favorite scene in the movie was, just because the scene where Vision hands Thor the hammer. I swear, like, first of all, my theater went silent for like half a second, and then everybody just erupted. That was such a well-timed, well shot, well built moment that it just got everybody. And that's, if I had to pick a single favorite scene in the movie, it's probably that. It was just all around, and the scene at the end where basically it comes down to the last Ultron robot and Vision, and it's even left a little bit ambiguous as to what happened. Probably not. It probably wasn't intended to be as ambiguous as it ended up seeming, but there's room for all kinds of stuff in there, and just a tremendous performance from a very short amount of time all around. It was really, really well done, and I'm definitely wanting to see more.
Yeah, I think we assume there's some ambiguity there because everyone here at least is to varying degrees comic book fans, and we all know that no one stays dead in comics.
Definitely not in the Marvel universe.
Unless you're Uncle Ben.
Unless you're Uncle Ben.
You can't even entirely say Gwen Stacy anymore.
It's true. All right, Jason, thoughts on the Vision? Brand new character kept out of most of the promotional materials. Now Keeper of the Mind Stone.
Well, this was actually my introduction to Vision. I haven't really followed it, Avengers and everything. So this was an introduction to me, which was kind of cool because it's like I'm learning now. I'm wanting to go back and compare what my perception of from the movie is to the comic book, and it's kind of cool because I'm seeing the differential, and it's like I'm learning so many quibs and stuff about the character. And I'm thinking back, but it's funny because when I'm reading this stuff, though, the mindset that I'm in is the movie adaptation of it, the visual I get, and it's kind of cool because like Gavin nitpicking, the eyes actually, like you brought up, Robert, gave more depth of the character. The realization when like you said, when he's out just looking at the city and he sees his own reflection, that fleshed out form of what we came to know as Jarvis, and it was really cool for me because you guys kind of stole the question I had about picking up Thor's hammer. You guys already touched on it, so I'm kind of left in the cold now, so I don't really have much more to say.
Sorry
about that.
Hey. If you two steal from me, I'm happy to not have anything to say.
All right, I got to get my major gripe out of the way here, and I'm going to apologize real briefly because this is going to turn into a bit of a rant. My biggest gripe with this movie, and I've come to have it about a lot of the properties within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is the lack of death. Now, that might sound... I don't mean I want everyone dying left, right, and center, okay? So please don't think that I prefer... It's no secret to anyone who knows me. I prefer my material a tad on the darker side. That's what appeals to me. I understand these are designed to be family movies, by and large. And consequently, you can't have, tons of destruction, death, carnage, mayhem. There's limits what you can do. And I'm understanding of that. I'm okay with that. My issue becomes, in this movie in particular, it really bugged me that there are apparently no fatalities. I mean, there are some people who died during the Hydra attack, or during the attack on the Hydra base, but Hulk rampages through a good portion of what I assume is Cape Town, South Africa. A giant section of land is raised into the upper atmosphere and dropped, with a bunch of civilians still kind of in and around it during the climactic battle. There's all these things, and there is no... Again, there's no repercussions. There's no, seriousness to it. I don't mind the Avengers trying to save everyone. I mean, the train derails. First thing Captain America does, looks to Quicksilver and says, "Get the civilians out of the path." Makes perfect sense. I'm okay with that. Them trying to clear the city before the final battle with Ultron. I'm okay with that. Makes sense. I don't hate that they try. I hate that they succeed. To the point where the last thing on a lifeboat to leave this, giant piece of rock that's about to be dropped is a dog. I mean, And I blame all of you out there, you whiny malcontents. Oh, Superman didn't worry enough about the people around him. Because I bet that all the executives at Marvel heard all of you and decided, hey, we can't have anyone die on screen. We can't even leave it somewhat ambiguous. I mean, at the end of this movie, the only confirmed fatality is Quicksilver. I'm going to assume there were a couple of other people that, Ultron got in his final little strafing fire on the Quinjet, but when you think of all the destruction, all of the chaos, all of the damage, people should be dying. Now, I don't mean we have to see all of it, but it should at least be discussed. And again, I blame everyone who complained about Man of Steel, because Superman engaged in an all-out brawl with a being of equal power and wasn't able to stop buildings from collapsing or, all the collateral damage, which is actually how that would go. And it stood out to me that Marvel seemed to have a mandate for this one. No one dies on screen again except Quicksilver, and it really, really bothered me. More so the second time, actually, just because there's no weight to any of the actions then, and I really hope, and I will say this, because you've got Captain America Civil War coming up. And if they don't at least discuss, loss of life, injury, disability, in addition to, the physical damage that has been caused by the Avengers starting with the Battle of New York, they will be seriously missing the point. All right, that's my big gripe. That's my rant's over there. All right, Jason, you got any major gripe? Since I just had my say as far as my biggest gripe, what's your biggest one for this movie?
I'm right there with you. I think that if they don't address it in Civil War, the fact that Earth's mightiest heroes have no governing body to regulate them nor their actions, and there's no consequences to their actions, it's going to be a gigantic failure by Marvel, because, like I said, Quicksilver was the only death that we actually seen, which that disappointed me. I was wanting to see the relationship of Quicksilver, Scarlet Witch, flesh come to the forefront a little bit more. I think the kid that actually played Quicksilver did a great job. The dynamic between him and Scarlet Witch was great. You had those undertones that you wasn't quite sure how to take, and they played it perfectly. Not too ham-handed, over the top, incestual, but it was enough to make you go, well, there's a possibility. But like I said, the repercussion aspect is my only gripe, because the fact that they even let Hawkeye run all the way back off, save a kid, sacrifice Quicksilver, and then make it back out before. I just don't. Like I said, it was the Superman complex, I guess is what we can call it, because I guess they heard the backlash and was like, well, we don't want anything of that. We see how bad DC's screwing up, and we don't want that stigma.
All right, Ben, your biggest gripe?
Okay. If I had, I'm going to get my gripe out of the way, because I'd actually like to kind of present the other side of what we were talking about.
Okay.
My biggest gripe is just mainly that in the little bit of time that in the amount of time that they had for this movie, they simply just tried to do too much. They tried to do too much. Mostly succeeded to a large degree. There was tons of action. There was character development. There was drama. There was romance. There was some thought-provoking things that you don't normally get in what is and it is what it is. Avengers is what it is as a series. It is a blockbuster, summer blockbuster franchise. You got a guy like Whedon who wants to make it substantial, and it puts it a cut above. But he had Marvel breathing down his neck every step of the way to include all these other different things, and it may have just been too much, and it probably could have benefited from maybe juggling fewer subplots. But it succeeded for what it did. Now, as far as death and the collateral damage, my defense of that, first of all, and maybe it's a flimsy defense, I'm not entirely sure, but I get the feeling that that's not something that they particularly wanted to address at any length within either Avengers movie, the first one or this one, because it's meant to be, the summer blockbuster. And maybe that's another big flaw with it. But what I noticed was, and even in Captain America, in Winter Soldier, the Captain America movies actually seem to be set up as the collateral damage movies, as the fallout movies, because you have in Captain America, the Soldier, it dealt a lot with a lot of the issues that were raised by Avengers, as far as what Nick Fury was trying to do with the alien technology, and in building this sort of superhuman advanced technology arms race, and whether or not what he was trying to do was morally right, and that was addressed as a result of the fallout from Avengers. And I believe that they're going to do the same thing with Civil War. Now, I'm going to go on record as saying I absolutely despise the comic book that Civil War is supposed to be based on, for any number of reasons. I'm hoping that they'll take, because it was a good idea that was executed absolutely horrendously, I'm hoping that they make up for that and they correct a lot of the things that were bad about the comic. But I know not everybody necessarily views the things that I didn't like as flaws, and I'm going to have to deal with that. But the idea of Civil War as a comic, and I'm hoping as a movie, is accountability. The accountability for all of this collateral damage, where Stark and Hulk are tearing up an entire city, and you get glimpses of, frightened bystanders and people running for their lives, and even the Hulk has this moment where he's looking and he's thinking, you could tell Banner's in there somewhere thinking, I did this, and I should be punished. And that's kind of where where Banner's arc in the movie leaves off, where he's kind of like exiled himself. I think, and there's a little bit of deja vu from what we were talking about, Robert, but these Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, they tend to be, yes, each movie should be looked at on its own merits and judged on its own merits, but we also, just like in the comics, it's part of a shared universe, and everything is very episodic, and things go from one story to another without necessarily being resolved until later on, and I think that's what we're seeing here. I think this was by design. I think whether it's Marvel or whether it was Joss Whedon through Marvel, by design, decided that this is not the movie to deal with the fallout, but the fallout will be dealt with.
Now, I agree with you by and large there, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that the way these movies are structured, dealing with the fallout is just not going to be addressed, and it's just part of how they're made and the overall, conception and execution of them as a whole. And that's fine. It's something I'm going to complain about from time to time when it beats me over the head. Like, again, I didn't have that complaint about the first one because I felt they handled it appropriately. In this one, it felt a bit more contrived, like they were desperately trying to avoid the even appearance of on-screen, trauma. And again, I do hope they deal with it. Otherwise, again, missing the point entirely. Okay, let's go ahead and do final thoughts on this one, and then we'll do plugs and go ahead and get out of here. Jason, let's go ahead and start with you. Overall thoughts? I know you did brief impressions, but overall thoughts on the final movie, recommendation, if you feel compelled to grade it on a scale, by all means do so.
I think it was one of the better superhero movies. It was, like I said, more story-driven, fleshed out. Highly recommended. If you are in any shape or form comic book, casual fan, diehard fan such as, most of us, definitely a good quality comic book superhero movie, probably one of the best ones done, due to the fleshed out storyline, the introduction of characters, how they tied up most things and started a new spin on things. So yeah, I highly recommend it. I mean, if I was to rate it, the 9.87321.
Oh, nice to know you have a highly sought out decimal system in place for stuff like this.
Exactly.
I appreciate it. I almost forgot to mention, but my other big moment from this movie is actually the mid-credits finale when Thanos finally gets out of his chair, because if that's handled properly, that's going to be all kinds of awesome. All right, Ben, final thoughts, recommendations?
I'll just say, this was a great, movie experience for me. Like, I got to see this movie with some of my best friends, and we were, ultimately, riffing and geeking out and just enjoying all the all the good parts. And we're all comic book fans, and we all got all the little hints and Easter eggs and all that stuff. And there was one point that I remember more than anything else. I turned to my best friend while we were watching some of the action scenes, and I turned to him and I looked at him and I told him, Kirby would have loved this. And that just kind of like had me smiling, like just this is the type of Avengers that that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and Roy Thomas and all the great comic book creators that made all of these great stories on which these movies are based on was seemed to be striving for. Just that balance of humanity and just complete spectacle, and I love that. And I like this movie at least as much as the first one. It's not perfect, but I wasn't expecting it to be. It was really entertaining, and I had a really great time watching it. And I really kind of wish I had seen it one more time before this podcast, but I'll be rectifying that real soon.
Yeah, I'm fortunate that whenever I do any of these reviews, I try to see the movies twice, just because the second time allows for slightly more critical thinking. I actually think it's to my detriment that I only saw Cinderella once before Mark and I reviewed it, and much as I hate, childish movies, I don't know if I was able to adequately process everything that went into that one and provide a completely coherent review. So I'll be seeing pretty much everything else twice if I can at all help it. All right, me personally had a really great time at the movies with this one. A lot of fun. There's enough depth to keep it from being completely superficial and borderline flat. My gripes aside, Ultron, the lack of damage and things like that, it's still great from pretty much start to finish. The writing is very good. It's all directed well. If you're debating seeing it, go see it. If you're debating seeing it a second time, I enjoyed it pretty much about as much the second time as I did the first. You just see things a little bit differently. So, my perspective, my recommendation there. All right, Jason, what do you got to plug?
Cheap Seats, Tuesday nights, 10 o'clock. Also, during the summer, I'll be on Screaming Boy Productions with Ronnie and Adam. Me and Jesse just wrapped up actually a series with them, a show with them Sunday night where we talked about Ultron. It was fun. It should be going up soon. Other than that, Cheap Seats will be back first week of June with an anniversary show that started our charity football league.
All right, looking forward to that one. Ben, what do you got to plug?
All right, racing through some plugs. I already plugged Jesse Starcher and Source Material. That's Mondays. We just talked Iron Man Demon in a Bottle this past week. I was pinch hitting for Mark Radulich, but I was happy to do it. As always, as ever, I write, draw, self-publish a comic called Soul Exodus. You can check out my website at soulexo.com, soulexo.com, facebook.com/soulexo, Twitter @soulexocomic. Check out some of my friends, Made to Fail Podcast, madetofail.net, my collaborator, frequent collaborator Louis Lovehog, aka Linkara, topthefourthwall.com. I had just confirmed like a couple of hours ago, I am going to be exhibiting at the Hamptons Comic Book Show on May 23rd. So if you happen to be in the Hamptons area of Long Island, New York, on May 23rd, check us out. Check out the website, hamptonscomicshow.com, I think it is. Let me double check that real quick. hamptonscomicbookshow.com for more information. And as always, and also as ever, Long Road to Ruin, which is coming at you tomorrow night. I did some artwork. Everybody seems to love it. I'm glad.
You did great artwork. That was awesome. That's one of your best, man. That is awesome. I really can't say enough good things about the piece you did for this one.
Thanks. It was a good time. Yeah, and Sean and Mark seemed to like it too. So yeah, Long Road to Ruin, Iron Man tomorrow night. Check it out.
Yeah, my plugs are going to be real quick, like they mentioned, like Ben mentioned. Long Road to Ruin tomorrow night, Thursday. I believe 9 p.m. Eastern. Might be at 10. They're monkeying around with the time a little bit because of what's going on in Mark's life. If Mark's unable to do it, I'm going to be pinch hitting and co-hosting the Look at the Iron Man trilogy with Sean Comer. Either way, check it out. It's always a good show. Then on Friday, 9 p.m. Eastern, my podcast, Everyone Loves a Bad Guy, is coming back. And yeah. I've got some bones to pick with some of the villains in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There's 11 movies and 3 television series. And the fact that we've got maybe 3 decent villains out of it, I got gripes, people, and everyone's going to hear about it. So I'm going to be I'm going to be tackling those start to finish. I'll probably have the phone lines open if anyone wants to call in and mention some of their favorites, things like that. Then the week after, unless something else happens that really pushes me in a different direction, I'm going to be looking at the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, what they've announced as far as movies, speculation on villains, whether or not we think they'll be good, things of that nature in the future. So I'll thank everyone right now for being excited, for everyone who's going to listen to those podcasts. I've been gone for a while. I'll give you all an explanation of why that is at the start on Friday. So that's going to wrap us up here. Go see Age of Ultron, everybody. For Jason Teasley and Benjamin J. Colon, I'm Robert Winfrey, stealing Mark Radlich's catchphrase once again of please be well, be safe, and behave.
There'll be spectacle, there'll be fantasy, there'll be daring do and stuff like you would never see.
Hey, a movie! Yeah, we're gonna be a movie!
Starring everybody
and me. There'll be heroes bold, there'll be comedy, and a lot of fuss that ends for us real happily.
Hey, a movie!
We can watch it all develop.
Starring everybody
and me. We'll take the world and set it on its ear.
Come on, join in. We're gonna start right here.
It's okay,